Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the Center of Automotive Research Management Briefing's Power Lunch. I am Dietmar Ostermann, a partner in PwC in Detroit and the US Automotive Advisory Leader. And the Power Lunch today is about the automotive supply chain and the way going forward, surviving and thriving in the new normal. I have two guests with me here today. Martin Horneck, who is the Chief Procurement Officer of FCA in North America, and Armando Tamez, who is the President and CEO of the automotive supplier Nemak out of Monterrey. And my presentation in this Power Lunch will be divided into three parts. First, I will share with you some of our research and some of our thoughts for about 20-30 minutes. Then I will invite Martin Horneck in, and he couldn't be here this morning in person. Something important came up, and so he offered to tape my questions and answers with him yesterday. So I will play that tape from our interview. And then I have here live with me Armando, and Armando and I will then discuss as a third part of our Power Lunch some of the observations from my presentations coming up. So that's the agenda, and I'm going to move right into our topic. We created 6 hypotheses for this Power Lunch. Number 1, the road to recovery for the auto industry will take several years in North America and globally. 2, the transition to electric vehicles will continue, not be slowed down. 3, the supplier bankruptcies will increase over the next 12 months. We haven't seen too many yet. Number 4, global supplier M&A will see a new record year next year, not this year. And 5, the sourcing strategies will be revisited by OEMs and Tier 1 suppliers as a result of COVID-19. And finally, number 6, supply chain transparency will increase further. It's already at a developed level in the automotive industry, but it will increase further, and we have some thoughts on that. So without further ado, I will jump right into our first hypothesis here related to the automotive industry comeback. What I'm sharing with you on screen are some of the forecasts that our partner and supplier IHS is producing. Many of the automotive companies are relying on IHS as a forecaster. They're certainly a powerhouse in that business. And what it shows you is how the forecast has changed from 2019 December to today. Obviously, the biggest deviations of this 20 million drop in global vehicle sales are in regions like North America, Greater China, Europe, but also Southeast Asia and now developed Asia, Japan, and Korea. While the forecasts are coming in a little bit better, the decline less in North America and in China. In the most recent forecast, the decline is increasing in Europe and in places like Southeast Asia and in developed Asia. So those are the dynamics. And if you look at the longer term outlook to 2026, you can see now that by 2026, the overall growth from vehicle production in 2019 has been cut by about 7 million units. So still in the latest forecast, the auto industry over the next 7 years is growing by about 7 million units. But the important point that I want to make here is that in the developed markets like North America or in Europe, we are barely getting back to the vehicle production levels of 2019. In fact, in Europe, we are right now not forecasted to come back to those levels. And even in China, if you think about it, there were times 5-10 years ago where the Chinese auto market was forecasted to go to 35 or 40 million units. Today, vehicle production has declined to 25 million units, and over the next 7 years, it's just going back to 30 million. Still, obviously, the biggest gain here on this overall chart. If you are focusing in on North America specifically, Lots of forecasters, not just IHS, are predicting a decline. The decline is somewhere between 20 and 40% in all forecasting activities. Our point here is that we don't believe that the decline at this point in time will be determined by the ability of the OEMs and the tier one suppliers and the entire supply chain to come back. That worked actually surprisingly well over the last 3 months, but it will be determined by a lack of demand, and we don't know yet the real lack of demand, because all of the sales figures coming in are still sales figures on a monthly basis or weekly basis that show some sign of impact, and so they're not entirely reliable. So we believe that the decline could be more than what IHS is forecasting. And the other important point that I wanted to make is that it will take to 2025, according to this latest IHS forecast, to actually come back to vehicle production levels in North America that equal 2019. Even though the majority of the production will be already back in 2022, we are coming back up to 15.5. So that's only 800,000 short of 2019 numbers, but the full recovery to 2019 levels will take a while. Moving on to my second hypothesis, electric vehicles. And yes, I'm conscious to the fact that there was just a session on electric vehicles, so I don't want to repeat all of this. My point is different. The point I wanted to make here this early afternoon is, if you look at the public filings, OEMs were intending to spend $350 billion in the next 3 years on new advanced technologies. And there's no way that will happen now. If you look at the right-hand side of my chart and you follow our annual PwC Global Automotive Supplier Study that measures the consolidation in the industry, then you know that auto suppliers on average earn today about 10% EBITDA margins globally. The auto OEMs have been sitting at 6.3. And based on these investment scenarios, the profitability was forecasted, depending on what scenario you looked at, by 1 or 2 percentage points at levels that are really not acceptable for any industry, also not for the automotive industry. So now that automakers this quarter and probably next quarter are reporting billions of dollars of losses, something has to let go. And so we are strongly believing that in addition to some cancellation or delays of car programs, some technology investments will be pruned. And some of those technology investments very likely will be level 4 or 5 autonomous investments, because the payback period is either not there or way too long, or it will be multiple powertrain solutions technologies, because it's just too expensive to entertain multiple powertrains at the same time for the entire fleet of vehicles. So on this chart 9, I'm showing to you the latest forecast on the development of the battery pack cost. The pack costs and the cell costs obviously determine the cost of the electric vehicle to a large degree, and we are now down to $150 per kilowatt hour. And our theory has been for a long time, if you see our publications, that economics will drive the switchover, certainly in North America. And we are predicting by now that around 2026, we will have total cost of ownership parity. And what that really means is a 3-year ownership period, counting in the acquisition of the vehicle and the maintenance and the cost of owning it and driving it. And at 2026, those costs between electric vehicle, pure electric vehicle, and ICE engine will be at parity. And that is when the floodgates are starting to open based on the economics, and more consumers will buy electric vehicles. In our outlook, that leads us to a worldwide level of new registrations in 2025 of about 14%, 24% in 2030, higher in Europe, obviously, and higher in China, but less so in the US, where we are expecting somewhere between 5 and 10%. My third hypothesis here that I want to talk to is supplier bankruptcies. We have not seen too many yet, and there's multiple reasons for it. One reason is, coming into this crisis, Automotive suppliers were much better prepared worldwide. They had higher earnings, they had higher cash, they had cash and undrawn revolver as a percent of revenue that was significantly higher than what they had in 2007 going into the financial crisis. However, there is significant deterioration going on over the last 6 months. We show you here at the end of 2019, the total debt divided by EBITDA over the EBITDA performance of the publicly traded automotive suppliers. The different color codings indicate US suppliers in orange and European suppliers in blue, and in light blue, the Asia Pacific suppliers. And what you can clearly see that after all the Q1 reports were finally filed with delay, and now some of the Q2 earnings reports are already filed, but not all of them, we see the amount of suppliers that are moving into the danger zone, which is the upper right-hand quadrant, doubling. So those are concerning developments. If you look at the deep dive, for instance, into North America, and I now show you a different analysis. This is the analysis of the approximate liquidity coverage that auto suppliers have on the y-axis over the last quarter EBITDA over the debt. So we took 1/4 of the debt and the last quarter EBITDA performance on the x-axis. And it shows you, at the moment in time when the auto suppliers were not producing because the OEMs were down, and they were basically surviving without revenue coming in, that at that moment in time, they absorbed fixed cost coverage because most of the material costs was not purchased and most of the employee costs didn't exist because employees were furloughed. And so at a coverage of 6 times fixed cost, you're very exposed to the coverage of 12 times fixed costs. You are okay. And so the upper right hand, again, of this particular graph is a danger zone, and we have over 30 suppliers in North America in that. It's even worse when you go to Asia and to Europe. There's over 40 of European suppliers in the danger zone and over 150 in Asia. Both Japan and China have some, but Korea has a majority of them. And that is not surprising to us as we have studied international markets. So why haven't we seen more bankruptcies? Well, to some degree, we haven't seen more bankruptcies because there were various government instruments put in place to support auto suppliers. Auto suppliers pulled out all of their revolvers, so they were sitting on cash. And also we found that the banking community was, because of the global nature of this real crisis, more forgiving. And that is why when covenants were breached, banks found ways to look over it. That will, we predict, not happen for too long going further. And so the situation is tightening. This bar graph here shows you our distress analysis, and I want you to particularly pay attention to the change in distress levels from last quarter 19 to the first quarter in 2020. On average, auto suppliers jumped almost 2 points on our scale from 0 to 10. 6 means this is real distress level. 7 is close to bankruptcy. 8 really is almost in bankruptcy. And this is for the entire supply base. If you try to divide by system on a global basis, body and chassis suppliers are looking worse than, let's say, electronic suppliers or exterior suppliers. But even in electronic suppliers, just look at the very significant increase in distress levels there. And here's a little bit of the evidence and the research of why we haven't seen more distressed auto suppliers declaring bankruptcy yet. The government loans put in place, we're counting about $9 billion in the US to auto suppliers. We believe there's more needed, so hopefully there will be a new program coming up soon. But even in Germany, where, it's the largest auto market in Europe, where Chapter 11 is not known and companies go typically quite right away into liquidation and the equivalent of Chapter 7, Germany has postponed that requirement, right? Some of you who are familiar with the bankruptcy laws in Germany know that you are personally liable as an executive if you don't file for the equivalent of Chapter 11 in Germany. And so people do proactively, but that has been delayed and sunsetted until September of 2020. So that's why we believe that after September, in the fourth quarter of 2020, more bankruptcies will be seen in North America as well as in major European markets. Hypothesis number 4, global auto supply M&A will going forward, particularly in 2021. So you all have seen some variations of these charts. The industrial products industry is hard hit, the auto industry is hard hit as it relates to the devaluation in the stock market, but auto suppliers are even hit worse than the industrial average. You can see our differentiation by system. All vehicle system suppliers have deteriorated, some more than others, but they're all significantly down. When we look at the supply base today, we see about 10% of the suppliers that are in very good shape to make acquisitions. There's a big base in the middle, 45 to 60%, that probably will do nothing and can do nothing. And then there is the bottom area that is at medium or high risk for 30 to 45% of suppliers, where we believe these suppliers either will go bankrupt or will sell the entire company before bankruptcy, or will sell certain assets in order to avoid further liquidity crunches. And that will be quite a bit. Our global automotive supplier consolidation study, which is about to be published later this week, always shows this chart here. This chart shows the buyer score on the x-axis, which measures the profitability and capability of auto suppliers, and the buyer attitude on the y-axis, which measures the intention to buy of auto suppliers. And you can see here the companies, 20 or so companies that we are calling out as the top consolidators this year. 7 of those are North American companies. Some of those, like Magna or others, are on this list repeatedly almost every year. And Lear, for instance, was on this list as well last year. And they are top performing auto suppliers of large scale that will likely not leave this situation unattended and will potentially engage into acquisitions going forward. What will they buy? Some of the segments that we believe are most distressed are body, interior, powertrain, chassis. If you look at body, it's the stamping, structural stamping, non-structural stamping type of activities. If you look into chassis, it's things like fuel tanks, shocks, catalytic converters, and such. Now, our team did an analysis of what more is to come. So looking at the more distressed or medium distressed suppliers by region, there's about 10 or so deals that we could imagine would happen in North America, another 25 or so in Europe, and maybe up to 100 in various markets in Asia. And that would kick off an avalanche of 30 to 40 billion in automotive deals. So pretty significant activity ahead. And that is why we are putting this chart together, which is our constant count of the M&A activity in automotive supply space globally. It shows you in the bar the deal value, and it shows you in the black line the amount of deals that are happening involving automotive suppliers over $50 million in revenue. So it's the entire global automotive supply base. Normally, we have between 200 and 300. Of late, it has been like 150 to 200. And we believe they will kick up later this year, going to the 200 level. And then next year is really the big year where we believe it will go to 250, maybe even creating a new record close to what we saw in 2010, 2011. Sourcing strategies will be revisited, particularly what we hear in our conversations with the OEMs and the tier ones is on the sourcing side, the discussion about regional sourcing versus global sourcing, as well as the new peaked up discussion about single source, dual source, multiple source. And then on the supply chain visibility side, the discussion about how much more visibility and what does it really mean do we need into the tier 2 supply space. So let me talk about those a little bit. I want to set the stage on page 27 by first saying, understanding the regional character of the automotive supply chain. We typically divide a vehicle up into 100 or so tier 1 major systems. Many of those today, because of the variance in the vehicle, are produced just in time, just in sequence. Typically that takes place in the supplier park or within 100 miles around the vehicle assembly plant. So by the nature of the beast, the automotive supply industry on the tier 1 level is mostly regional, very different from other discussions that are taking place in the industrial product space right now about China sourcing or low-cost country sourcing. We don't have that really on the tier 1 level that much. Then there are some tier 1 components, subsystems that are not as transportation intensive, and they are mostly coming from North America as well. Some of them would be maybe sometimes globally imported, particularly if it's parts like A, B, C pillars or seat belts or sensors. Some of those components could be coming from LCC countries. But what it really nails down to is the discussion around tier 2 components going into these JIT assemblies and GIS assemblies, or some of the low transportation intensive tier 1 commodities that we just talked about a moment ago. That's what the conversation centers around. Nobody thinks there will be any changes to the just-in-time, just-in-sequence nature of the 80% of the tier 1 systems that are already assembled around the vehicle assembly plant. So now looking at actually facts, that helps. So in this whole entire conversation about China and the US, it's important to look at the left-hand side of this chart. So if you're thinking about the US assembly plants, they're importing today $42.7 billion worth of parts from all over the place. This is about the 10 million vehicles that are assembled in the US, not counting Canada or North America and in Mexico in this particular analysis. Of that relates to about 150 billion in parts purchases and material purchases. So about 25% is imported and 75% is coming from the US. And out of the 42.7 billion that are imported, the lion's share comes today from Mexico and Canada. And then Apex outside of China really refers to the Japanese OEMs producing in the US and the Korean OEMs producing in the US, because a lot of those are coming from Japan and from Korea. And then the real China content is 7% of 43 billion, that's 3 billion. If you look at the entire automotive parts import statistics, the imports last year from China for auto parts, OEM and aftermarket were somewhere in the $6 to $9 billion range. These are core parts. So what that means is we really don't import a lot of parts today from China, but there are some. There are some tier 2 parts. If you move over to Europe, and I took Germany as the largest European car market, it's even more pronounced, right? Obviously, a lot of components are made in Germany, but from the ones that are imported, 83% are imported from Eastern Europe or Western Europe, and China is a negligible share. Now, of course, the whole entire trade debate, and it will never go away, independent of the result of the November election in the United States. People are heightened aware of the discrepancies in trade. And so I don't think it will ever go away entirely, no matter where people settle. So taking that into account, and taking into account the wage developments, where Mexico now clearly on average is lower than the wages in China. Obviously, it depends both in China and Mexico where specifically you're producing. But so that has leveled the playing field in a very significant way. So on page 30, I want to show what really comes from China, particularly as it relates to into the United States. So here you see some of these select components. For instance, ball bearings, $1.3 billion worth of ball bearings, many of them from China or are globally sourced from elsewhere. gears, 3.5 billion, fans, 2.3 billion, electrical switches, 2.7 billion. So those are the components. If you're talking about a typical OEM that has a vehicle assembly plant in North America, in Europe, and in China, and that has a tier one that sits outside the vehicle assembly plant in North America, in Europe, and in China, where do some of these tier two components now come from for the identical vehicle, almost identical vehicle, that is produced in 3 regions around the world? And that's where double tooling comes into play. That's where the supply chain strategies are being investigated and said, people are looking at this and saying, should I get for all 3 assembly locations that tier 2 part from China, or should I get that part from China and from Mexico, or should I get from Mexico for the entire world? And that, of course, would be the view of an American car company, and maybe a Japanese OEM would have a significant bigger share of China and Japan and would evaluate that as opposed to making this part in Europe where they have a smaller footprint. The German OEMs obviously would favor Eastern Europe, maybe plus China, and not North America in order to create potentially dual locations. So that is the exercise, and clearly we think changes will happen. Changes will happen on the tier 2 level, and the benefits are clear. It's a shorter supply chain. It's a more visible and controllable supply chain. Production lead time reductions, but yes, there may be to some degree increased tooling costs. There may be to some degree, but not necessarily unit cost differences, because we just saw that Mexico can produce cheaper than China. Okay, with that, I'm teeing up my last hypothesis, supply chain transparency. Maybe first starting with a little bit of what it is that we are talking about. Well, we are not talking about OEMs to tier ones, right? That's very obvious, and OEMs know who their tier ones are and ideally know about their operational and financial condition. We are really talking now about the tier twos. What is the relationship between the OEMs and the tier twos? What do they know about it? And how do the OEM, the tier ones, treat the tier twos and know about it, or even the tier threes beyond the tier twos? That is the most important supply chain visibility, and we're talking about the bill of material visibility, financial visibility, that whole entire visibility real time, then being able to maybe create digital twins to do some real analysis on time, real time about changes to the supply chain as I incur some problems, and then having AI supported control towers in place that solve some of those problems without human interference. Those are some of the top supply chain visibility and actions that people are talking about, and that digital leaders who declared this in PwC's digital supply chain survey are starting to enact on. And here's a good example that I love, where it shows you how far we still have to go in supply chain visibility. On the right-hand side, our research found that, yes, there are some world-class suppliers out there that have a complete visibility and do a fantastic job managing their tier twos, both financially and operationally. And there are others out there who are doing an okay job, but then there is 40% that either have an insufficient process or no process at all. And that needs to change in today's 2020, 2021 automotive supply chain. And how do you create that visibility? Well, you have to have a integrated supplier risk management process in place that goes from supplier onboarding via risk assessment to performance monitoring to risk response activities, technology supported. And some of the technologies that are out there you see today on the right-hand side, very good solutions available, not just one that people are exploring with. Those are my initial remarks. And yes, we are allowing you to ask questions. You have to type in this platform your questions. And then Armando, Tamez, and I will address those questions. But before you do so, I want the organizer to roll our video from my interview with Martin Horneck, CPO of FCA North America. Thank you, Martin, for joining us today for the Car MBS Power Lunch. These are clearly extraordinary times in the automotive industry and in society in general. We talk here in this power lunch about the implications for the automotive supply chain. And we know that the auto industry stepped up significantly, and FCA was a major player in this fight. Can you please share with us an update?
Thank you, Dietmar, and thank you to the conference organizers for holding the management briefing seminars. I hope everybody watching is safe and well. We are living through an unprecedented time, and I cannot praise enough the level of commitment, solidarity, and efforts exhibited by everybody during these months to help our local communities and first responders and healthcare workers. The extraordinary way our employees, our suppliers have mobilized shows again the automotive industry is capable of applying its ingenuity to any situation. We have been highly focused on implementing our rigorous plan to get the industry back up, always keeping the safety and the well-being of our employees and local communities at the forefront of our efforts. Most of our plants are back up and running in all regions with a major focus on health and safety protocols without any noticeable disruption. And I cannot tell you how happy this makes me. We were able to adhere to our planned restart schedule. And beyond our operations, our company has been very active in supporting our communities during the global crisis. Just as an example, FCA has produced more than 15 million masks that we have donated to those who are on the front line of the pandemic and to support the company's internal needs. In North America, we've donated more than 5.3 million face masks, with half of those being distributed in Michigan. In addition, we have donated 4.4 million meals to children, families, and seniors, with nearly a quarter of that going to Detroit nonprofits. We partnered with the city of Detroit this summer to help 2,400 families impacted by the global pandemic. And just across the street from our new Nemak assembly plant, employees and community volunteers loaded residents' vehicles with food, face masks, hand sanitizers, and other household items. We've also provided Ram and Chrysler and Jeep vehicles to the Red Cross to help with delivery of healthcare supplies. Our suppliers also delivered so much to fight the pandemic. They produced face masks, face shields, medical equipment. Thanks to all of you for making a difference in the lives of so many people. It makes me incredibly proud to be part of the FCA team.
That is quite the support that FCA provided. There are still obviously challenging months ahead, especially given the lasting effects that this will all have on the economy. Can you share FCA's view on vehicle production going forward?
As we all know, the market was down significantly year over year in each of the regions due to the impact of COVID-19. In North America, while sales were down, we saw the resilience of the US customers with the reopening of the economy in April through the quarter. Obviously, the big unknown continues to be how markets will perform and whether there will be any significant disruption to the demand. Clearly, the market situation is very fluid, so our current expectations are subject to the risk of changes. We laid out our last view during the Q2 conference call with the analysts. Our current market assumptions show continued moderate improvement for the 13.5 million we saw in June. It will get us to a full year SAAR of around 14 million. And this represents a 20% decline year over year. One thing is that we have seen over time is that trucks and SUVs continue to gain popularity. In the US market, those products make up roughly 70% of vehicle sales. Most companies have realigned product portfolio to introduce more SUVs and trucks. We saw the shift already 5 years ago and have realigned our product portfolio accordingly. And now we've introduced products like the all-new Gladiator, coming soon the newest Jeep vehicles, which includes the next generation Grand Cherokee and the all-new 3-row full-size Jeep SUV. Also in our plans are the Jeep plug-in hybrids. And all these great products will come out of our new assembly plant in Detroit, as well as Warren Truck, Jefferson North, all in Michigan.
If you think back, Martin, to the past quarter, please share some thoughts on the assembly plant ramp up and what process and systems FCA put in place to make it as smooth as possible.
Absolutely. You've heard in North America, we are currently running production at pre-pandemic levels, with the exception of Warren Truck and Toluca plants, which are both currently down for planned retooling activities related to future product actions. First, thankfully, there have not been any significant supply chain production disruptions since we have restarted the operations. The FCA family has worked tirelessly to create an environment that can keep everybody safe by following the new protocols. In terms of specific actions, the first thing we knew we had to do was increase our level of communication. We worked proactively and collaboratively with our supply base. We held regular supplier calls to share best practices for health and safety protocols, provide updates on restart timing, understand their manpower needs and financial challenges. And interestingly, we did all this virtually. And again, I couldn't be more impressed by the leadership of our suppliers and FCA to make this virtual environment work. On a personal note, my first day at FCA was March 9th. And even though I spent only 1 week with my team in person in the office, and as well as with my colleagues, we were able to connect and work through all these challenges as a virtual team. Transparency and accountability became the key. My mantra throughout this time was confirm, don't assume. We wanted to be sure that our suppliers had confirmation that their supply chain risk was mitigated and everybody was ready for a day we could restart the operations. To help, we provided transparency. We engaged with PwC to work with our suppliers to ensure the readiness of our tier 2, 3, etc. supply base. In May, as we were planning for plant startups, we held individual meetings between our plant leaders and suppliers to align and prepare and ensure we communicate all the open issues that are there. In these meetings, we shared new policies, procedures, practices with the goal to ensure alignment and support successful restart of our operation. Our supply chain team proactively managed in-transit inventories, reduced material risk at startup, as well as our supplier operations team and supplier delivery risk team continues to provide on-site monitoring to support our supplier operation, COVID-19 safety protocols, and quick response feedback systems. I would have never thought in March that we would be able to get our complicated supply chain up and running flawlessly by June, but we did it. It was a focused effort, working together to achieve a common goal through communication, collaboration, and commitment. And when I say team, I mean our supply base and FCA. Again, I want to thank our suppliers for their hard work and focus to bring this industry back to life. The only comment I have to say is job well done. Thank you.
While the automakers are back up and running, there have been lasting financial implications for the automotive suppliers. Can you give us your perspective on what you see out there in the coming months to go?
There's a definite challenge in the industry right now for everybody. When our business was not working and producing products for 3 months, the financial situation for everyone deteriorated. Many governments, especially in North America, implemented financial support programs to help companies through the crisis. Those programs helped everybody, but there still are challenges as some of those programs are expiring. The supply base will consolidate, and we see this trend continuing for the balance of this year and next year. We are being proactively identifying those challenges and are developing mitigation plans accordingly.
A lot of what you seem to be referencing is related to supply chain transparency. Can you comment on the efforts that FCA may be putting in place or have already put in place with regards to supply chain transparency?
Certainly, and I can say this pandemic has reiterated the importance of supply chain transparency. We all know global supply chains are becoming increasingly complex, and companies are working with suppliers across many regions reacting to constantly shifting challenges and policies. Having complete visibility to what's happening at all tiers of the supply chain is critical and vital to keep our production going. We also want to reiterate our commitment to responsible procurement of raw materials, especially as our electrification strategy ramps up. FCA joined the Responsible Sourcing Blockchain Network to ensure sustainable, responsible sourcing and production practices from mine to market are taking place. Having visibility and transparency into what is happening at all tier levels of the supply chain allows organizations to be more proactive to manage supply chain risk. We use these new tools, and the use of these new tools will continue to increase over the next couple of years.
Martin, I know this was short and sweet. We thank you so much for your willingness to step in here and answer a couple of burning questions for the CAR MBS conference. Thank you very, very much.
Thanks, Dietmar and CAR, for taking the time to make this event work on a virtual basis. Greatly appreciate being part of your event. Thank you very much and stay safe. All the best.
Okay. Here we go. Armando, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you very well, Dietmar. Then I'd like to thank you for inviting me, as well as the CAR organizers.
Yeah, this was a lot to swallow, and maybe the best thing is we start by introducing Nemak to everybody. You are the largest supplier in Mexico. You are obviously very global, and you are a heavyweight in terms of lightweighting solutions, and you are in the powertrain and structural business. But maybe you can say it in your own words. What does Nemak stand for, Armando?
Yeah. Thank you, Dietmar. Well, Nemak stands for the lightweighting. We started 40 years ago producing aluminum cylinder heads, and then we moved to making engine blocks, also out of aluminum. And most recently, over the last 7 years, we started diversifying, looking at the electrification coming forward in the industry. And now we are making structural component parts of aluminum as well, and also electric mobility parts, battery housings, electric motors, and so on. All aluminum, basically to help our customers reduce weight, improve efficiency on their vehicles. Last year, we ended with approximately about $4.4 billion US dollars. This year is going to be tougher. And you're right, we are diversified. We have 38 plants in 16 different countries, mainly North America, South America, Europe, as well as Asia.
So maybe we digest what I presented and what Martin commented on piece by piece. Maybe you can start with your reaction to the volume discussion. What do you think is going to happen globally and in North America?
Yeah, well, we are using basically the same analysis that you are following. So not only IHS, which I think provides very reliable information, but we are using also information from PwC and other consultants. Basically, we agree with the points that you presented, Dietmar, in which we see that the global auto industry will take at least 4 years to recover to previous levels, what we saw in 2019. Certainly, the two main markets in which we are positioned, North America and Europe, and I'll talk a little bit more, we foresee a decline this year in the range of about 20 to 25%. We're seeing, as Martin was already mentioning, a nice recovery, especially on SUVs and pickup trucks, which we hope that it will maintain very strong. Europe, we're a little bit more concerned. I think it's going to take a little bit longer for Europe to recover, in spite of the fact that recently the European community offered very nice stimulus package, 1.8 trillion euros of a stimulus package that will be implemented after it is approved by Parliament. It was already approved by 27 European countries, which hopefully that will improve the European economy and certainly have people coming back to purchase new vehicles. In China, as everybody knows, it's already moving at the right pace. They had a very fast recovery. So overall, we agree 100% with your comments about that it's going to take some time to recover.
Thank you, Armando. I'm interested in your views on what you see in the supply chain. So obviously you are a tier 1 supplier, so your perspective is towards the OEM, but then also towards your tier 2s. Do you see a lot of bankruptcies? Do you see a lot of changes as it relates to the supply chain?
Yes, Dietmar. Certainly we are seeing already some of our suppliers struggling financially. It was already tight. I think we need to go back a little bit. For instance, we're still powertrain is our main focus, and it started in 2015 with the diesel scandal, which changed dramatically the landscape. And then we have, in addition to that, in 2018, the WLTP, probably you're very familiar, is a new test for the European auto industry, in which is more stringent those regulations, and it also took a toll in some of the powertrain suppliers, especially the ones located in Europe. In addition, last year we had unfortunately a strike of one of our most important customers. It was solved, but that add to the COVID-19 put a lot of pressure, not only the tier 1s but also tier 2 and tier 3 suppliers. I think we need to watch them. We need to see how we can navigate these rough waters.
Yeah, and maybe you can also comment specifically on this discussion of single sourcing versus dual sourcing, as well as this whole entire topic about sourcing globally from places like China or Mexico versus regionally. Would be interested in your perspective there, because you know the Mexican market better than anybody.
Yeah, well, certainly our customers, many years ago, we have been in business for a long period of time. They started actually with, I remember for one cylinder head, we were 5 suppliers making the same. And I think as soon as they developed capabilities in the supplier base, they started by concentrating more on the most reliable and competitive suppliers. And they have this dilemma. On one hand, yes, you can reduce the risk of diversifying and having more than one supplier for the same commodity. On the other hand, they need to spend more resources in terms of development cost as well, engineering and tooling. So they will need to balance. And I think at the end of the day, is our customer's decision, is nothing that we can do unless certainly we can provide them with a very competitive offer, not only in terms of cost, but also technology and reliability. And I believe that, for instance, the new USMCA that recently was signed by the 3 US, Canada, and Mexico, I think it will provide great opportunities for the supplier base in the region. And I think, as you presented in your material, Dietmar, there is a lot of parts that today are being imported from Asia, and those will have a significant taxes or duties on those parts. So I think it will be beneficial for the suppliers that are already located in this region. And I think we can capitalize on that with the new regulations or new rules. We need to increase from 62.5% to 75%. So I think is an opportunity for all the suppliers that we already have a strong footprint in the North American base.
Yeah, thank you, Armando. The organizer was very clear with me that when you go all virtual with the conference, you still need to provide for the breaks in between the sessions. So I want to ask you one more question before we go offline, and that is this whole entire distress level in the automotive supply industry also, as I pointed out, represents opportunities for companies to potentially double down. So is Nemak specifically looking at potentially acquisition opportunities? Can you comment on that at all?
Yeah, I think we are a company that has been growing fast over the last 20 years, both organically and also strategic by some acquisitions, but we are also a very prudent company. At this point in time, I can tell you that we're looking at some opportunities because they come at, most of them at the request of customers, to take a look at some competitors or peers that are struggling, and they want a reliable supplier to help them. And we're analyzing some of those opportunities. However, we know that we are facing a lot of uncertainty in the market. So we will be very prudent, and if an opportunity comes, certainly we will take a look and perhaps execute it. Maybe not in the short term, but more in the midterm.
Okay. Thank you very much, Armando, and thank you very much for being willing to being on stage here at CARB today for the Power Lunch.
Yeah,
also, thank you to Martin Horneck for jumping in and doing a interview prior to, so we could play it in here. Thank you to the organizers at CARB for allowing us to host this Power Lunch session. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. And this is the conclusion of the Power Lunch.
Thank you. And be safe.